Thank you, Manny. Okay. So yeah, I want to thank not only Manny, but Torkel, Nemanja, Anthony, everyone else involved in organizing this, and for all of you for being here. I want to basically talk about our Gary Emanuel's theory of unequal exchange, because I believe it's essential for understanding imperialism in the 21st century. And I hope that this presentation can provide a starting point for applying it to the topic of online labor platforms. Because without Emanuel's formulation of strict or narrow unequal exchange, we wouldn't be able to exactly understand the nature of how these platforms are conduits for imperialism today. Online labor platforms are essentially websites where firms sign up to access a global pool of digital freelancers. These workers are young and highly educated, working in roles such as software engineering and data science, writing and translation, accounting and professional services, and just about any other occupation that could be done with a computer and internet connection. They're paid nowhere close to the wages of Western workers who do the same jobs and have the same skills and use the same machines, which is a reality that undermines the argument often given as justification for international wage differentials and underdevelopment. Emanuel is essential here because his theory of unequal exchange in the strict sense explains how value transfer happens internationally even between the same industries. Earlier theories of broad unequal exchange identified value transfer with specialization of a nation's economy, for example, when one country exports steel and another makes automobiles and then sells it at a higher price at the world market. So my talk focuses on how narrow unequal exchange functions in this new aspect of the international digital economy that we call platforms. So since the early 1970s, the world economy has undergone dramatic change under globalization, with national and local economies increasingly integrated into a unified capitalist space. The main drivers of this process have been the expansion of Western imperialism after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the introduction of neoliberal policies, and new technologies that have enabled faster material and information flows. The international division of labor, once characterized by a binary between the agricultural periphery and the manufacturing center, has changed. Through outsourcing and offshoring, select peripheral countries have undergone an industrialization process while the rest of the periphery has dropped into deeper levels of underdevelopment. Today, 70% of all economic activity in OECD countries consists of services and are highly reliant on digital technology in all aspects of their economies. Since these knowledge-intensive stages of production have the highest profitability in the global economy, the previous international division of labor is retained, although its organization is transformed. And then since around 2015, online labor platforms have opened new avenues for imperialism by continuing outsourcing trends without requiring foreign direct investment. So, a speaker earlier was talking about multinational corporations transferring organic capital to the global south. It's not really a factor here because they're just using a computer and internet connection. Information and communication infrastructure has essentially eliminated distances in space and time, meaning capital can instantly access this global labor pool. Platforms are also a central part of the automation process and the growth of artificial intelligence. A 2015 World Bank report, for example, acknowledged that the rapid growth of micro-work and platforms is largely driven by the need to train AI models. The World Bank has since then, in 2024, estimated that between 150 and 450 million people engage in online gig work globally. And that's about 4 to 12% of the worldwide labor force, the low end of which is roughly equivalent to the number of transnational migrant laborers. The figure on the left here shows that platform work is normally broken into two categories: micro work and freelancing. Micro work it's like seconds long tasks involving usually classifying images or sanitizing data for machine learning. Freelancing refers to more high-skilled service roles, for example, a 6-month contract as a software engineer for a machine learning startup in Silicon Valley. On the right, we see that a majority of platform workers hold advanced degrees, around 65%. Not shown here is that most of them are aged between 15 and 29, again, around 60%. And combined, these conditions create a global reserve army of highly skilled digital workers that clients in service-heavy economies need to tap into to basically expand digital economy. Platform work is often precarious by the nature of its one-off contracts. Wages face downward pressure because workers are often bidding on job listings that have dozens of other public offers, making them feel like they have to work for less. Wages are minuscule, with global averages for the 5 most popular platforms around $2.50 an hour, and many workers report going without healthcare and other securities, obviously. This low pay is compounded by the substantial unpaid work required to actually secure the contract in the first place, with the average respondent to one survey reporting that they spend 16 hours a week updating their profiles and applying to jobs alone. Platform workers are constantly surveilled by rating systems called algorithmic management. If they violate platform rules or don't work fast enough, they can lose contracts or have their accounts banned entirely. Workers often have no recourse when they are banned, since humans are not in the management chain, and they find dead ends when trying to resolve these issues through the automated chatbots on the platform. The workers' behavioral data while using the platform is then collected and used to train the very algorithmic management systems that manage them. And once that's finished, the data is sold to the highest bidder, usually a marketing, surveillance, or another AI company. Since platform workers are classified as independent contractors, they lack labor protections, and in some countries can actually be held liable for collusion if they attempt to organize, because they're self-employed businesses, technically. They're responsible for securing all necessary resources for their job, including the workspace, power, computer, software, and skills training. And by externalizing these costs, the socially necessary labor time borne by the global north clients is reduced, and a critical element in the unequal exchange mechanism is achieved. To just very briefly, so you know, like physically what I'm talking about, is basically a website that looks like this. This is what a worker sees when they sign into a micro task platform called Amazon Mechanical Turk. They're presented with a list of tasks that pay between 1 US cent and $8. And as you can tell by the task titles, it's basically just for training artificial intelligence software, like is this parking space occupied, and address identification. And when you actually choose one of those, like is this parking space occupied, this is basically the task that you are asked to do, and you're paid 1 cent for answering every one of these questions. Now, how that works out hourly, one study showed that US workers earn an average of $3 per hour, and Indian workers earn about $1.50, which are contextualized by broader data that shows that platform workers as a whole earn an average of 70% less than traditional employees. On the opposite end of microtasks or long-term contracts for high-skilled IT services, such as this typical listing for a software engineer on Upwork. It's a 6-month contract paying between $15 and $25 hourly. The client is in San Diego, has hired 25 people through Upwork since 2020, and has paid an average rate of $16 an hour. However, the Board of Labor says that the hourly mean wage for a software engineer in California is $83 per hour. Based on this client's public reviews, it appears that all of their contracts were completed by workers in the Global South, specifically Pakistan, Nigeria, and Vietnam. This data from the Oxford Online Labor Index shows that India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan account for half of all registered freelancers globally. On the left is 2017, on the right is 2024. We see that between those years, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Venezuela expanded massively, and the U.S. dropped from around 9% to around 4%, with the UK share dropping from 7 to 2. So there's a clear outsourcing mechanism when you look at that. As for the demand side, well, 40% of it is coming from the US, which makes sense with the Silicon Valley and high level of technical concentration. 3/4 of all demand comes from all high-income countries in general, which their share might actually be larger, since the outliers of India, Pakistan, and the others, they might actually just be subcontracting demand from the global north, but we can't really say from the data. And then this is just the same 2 graphs side by side. So it's clear that it's a mechanism for outsourcing and automation, which is not unexpected, since the World Bank report was actually entitled "The Global Opportunity in Online Outsourcing." And that report did acknowledge, for example, that there are negative psychological effects of microtask work, but it argued that developing countries could benefit from tapping into this new source of income for their unemployed youth. It argued, quote, a flexible working schedule allows individuals to take better care of their families, continue to study, and start their own business while working and earning a salary. Furthermore, it provides opportunities for on-the-job learning and skills development in areas such as information technologies and marketing, unquote. But this typical business optimism faces the reality that this survey that was conducted of 107 platform workers in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa who reported a mean weekly wage of only $165. Some reported incomes below their country's monthly minimum wage and several near the global poverty line of $58 a month. Globally, UNCTAD found that across 5 platforms, wages were consistently sub-minimum and international wage differences were stark. This gap persists regardless of workers' skill or productivity since they're performing identical tasks. These findings challenge a key justification often given for global inequality. The point is not that nobody benefits whatsoever from engaging in platform work. Just like remittances from migrant labor, these wages may provide supplemental income that benefits individual workers' families. But the point is that systemically, platforms reproduce and even exacerbate underdevelopment by A, continuing to undervalue labor along the periphery of the world system, B, maintaining an international wage gap that prevents countries from rising out of underdevelopment, and C, blocking the ability of highly skilled workers to realize transformative skills within their own countries for their own economies. What then explains the international wage gap that persists regardless of productivity or skill? Argyri Emanuel argued in his work Unequal Exchange that wages are an independent variable in price determination set according to what he called ethical factors that are mediated by moral and historical elements. Emanuel wrote, regardless of market conditions, there are wage levels that are impossible because unthinkable in a particular country at a particular period for a particular racial or ethnic group of wage earners. This clearly applies globally. It happens today that workers in the global south earn an average of 87 to 95% lower wages than workers of equal skill in the developed countries. Our world has been bifurcated by capitalist development into 2 realities. A minority of the world's population, those in the metropolitan center, enjoy what we call an imperial mode of living. Their everyday activities are furnished with material luxuries derived from the super-exploitation of labor power along the periphery, and their consumption habits contribute to most of the world's ecological impacts. In stark contrast, the global proletariat as a whole exists in a state of chronic deprivation, excluded from the most basic infrastructure of modernity. Access to essential resources remains severely restricted, with limited access to land, water, and food, and roughly 60% of the global population remains cut off from the digital world and internet services entirely. This lends obvious incentive towards migration to the metropolitan center, where despite internal wage discrimination, higher wage jobs and a higher standard of living can be sought. As Emanuel noted, in theory, large-scale migration from low-income countries could equalize wages and thereby reduce unequal exchange. Despite its political and physical impossibility, imperialist states respond to this potential threat of wage equalization by enforcing rigid constraints on migration through the militarization of borders and immigration systems. Especially at a time when migration has become a central political issue in the global north, platforms allow capital to avoid this tension and its associated costs by accessing labor directly in its origin country. For example, just last week on January 20th, the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, said that automation will eliminate mass migration. Although this techno-fascist vision is unrealistic and probably only serves to inflate the investments for AI, it's still important to note that stated intent. You may have noticed that China was not in the top 15 countries that supply platform workers. Most international platform work is done in English, given the demand origin. China, on the other hand, has developed its own digital economy, along with its own platforms, such as Jubaijie and Boss Chipin, to service their own economy's needs. Platform work in China, therefore, appears, at least at first glance, I'm still in the process of this study, but it appears to bypass a lot of the mechanisms that we've discussed here, since its platform economy is mostly national. When Chinese platform workers do use a global platform like Upwork, for example, they're found to be in the top 90th to 100th percentile in wages, compared to Indian workers at 10 to 25th percentile. If we're to think about the possibilities of other countries to develop their own platform economies, the requirements of setting up and running an online labor platform itself is cheap and technically trivial. The difficulty is in finding the national demand for this type of work given its concentration in the central economies. In other words, the development of indigenous machine learning systems and everything that is needed for them. So in conclusion, the study demonstrates that online labor platforms exacerbate unequal exchange in the global economy and provide a virtual mobility fix for capital. High-skilled workers in the global south continue to subsist on low wages while transferring their technical capacities into products and services for consumption in the global north. The persistence of unequal exchange, even among highly skilled labor, challenges the conventional justification for global inequality and highlights the enduring structural constraints on peripheral development. Instead of relocating manufacturing to peripheral regions, platforms reduce space-time distance through technological means. Capital remains concentrated in the core while peripheral labor is integrated into global value chains under conditions that prevent wage equalization. Unlike industrial relocation, platforms do not transfer physical productive assets, instead leaving infrastructure concentrated in the north and locking peripheral economies into dependency. In this context, technology transfer seems materially impossible to occur. Legal and structural barriers in the central economies, such as limitations and the extraterritorial application of labor protections, further reinforce these imbalances, allowing multinational corporations and platforms to minimize their accountabilities. These findings point towards a strategic horizon consistent with the linking traditions of unequal exchange theorists. Control over technological infrastructure is a central terrain of struggle in the contemporary global economy. Unless developing countries can implement their own technological capacities, they remain trapped in subordinate positions in the new global economy. This resistance is crucial, especially as platforms continue to expand. Importantly, further research is needed to determine the conditions under which cooperative, public, and nationally controlled platforms emerge. Researchers in China, for example, have proposed a model for platforms which aims to address widespread violations of labor rights by making platform works more visible to labor law institutions. These investigations are critical for identifying potential ways to combat digital era unequal exchange and promote global labor justice, and Emanuel's theories have proven a fruitful starting point for them. Thank you.